When I was in middle school and high school, I loved going to the arcades. My best friend and I would go at least once a week to one arcade or another, spend hours there and pockets full of quarters playing the games. I loved playing the video games, exciting combat games. He preferred playing the games where you'd perform some skill and then get tickets for it that you could redeem for a prize. He wanted, if he was going to spend money for the afternoon, he wanted something he could take with him, something that would last. He is now happily married, has several children running around, but I doubt that any of those toys or games that we won there at the arcade lasted long enough for him to give to his children. We all want something that remains. And there's a natural desire and kind of an awe for things that are permanent, things that endure. Imagine for the apostles who lived there in Galilee, a land spotted with small towns. The houses, the buildings that they were used to, built out of wood or out of clay, built quickly only to last for a few generations. And then they go to Jerusalem in the gospel and they see the magnificent city, the huge city, for the first time. The city of Jerusalem had already been there for over 2,000 years by the time Jesus and the apostles came along. And they're in awe of the wall, the buildings, how big they are, and in particular the temple. The temple had been first built by Solomon about 1,000 years before Jesus and the apostles. And while it had been destroyed and rebuilt twice, parts of that original temple still remained. It had been built out of huge stones the size of semi-trailers. It was amazing that they could be cut and moved and stacked. That temple had a sense of permanence. If God is eternal, the house ought to be able to last forever. And we kind of do the same thing in the way that we build our churches, building them out of brick or stone with huge, heavy wood pillars that give it the sense of being sturdy, that it's going to last a long time. But this place, it won't last forever. It's not yet 60 years old, and it's already been renovated 4 times. The place I stand now is where the altar once was. Not long after the church was opened, the parish hall was converted into additional seating in the church. Those who've been around for a while tell stories of sitting over in the annex. Then in 1998, we added the Adoration Chapel. 2003, turned the whole church sideways. And then 2 years ago, expanded that Adoration Chapel and redid the entryway to make it a more fitting entry into this place of prayer. We try to build things that will last, that will be around for the future, but we never know what the future is going to hold. Even our most long-range plans are short-sighted by God's standards. In the gospel, Jesus talks about the end of the world. In verse 3, Peter, James, John, and Andrew take him aside and they ask, "Lord, when is this going to happen?" He tells them in the following verses that it's a long way off. In the meantime, they have a lot of work to do. And in fact, if they just keep working until the very last minute, well, that would please the Lord very much. In verses 13 to 23, he turns their attention to the destruction of the temple, that building that was so magnificent that they looked at and thought it would last forever. He says it won't be around forever. It won't last. He tells the disciples that when that destruction, when that day comes, he tells them what they should do. And so years later, in 70 AD, when the Romans come to destroy the temple and the city of Jerusalem, the Christians knew what to do. And they survived. Many of the Jews did not. Thousands perished that day by the sword, the fire of the Romans. Verses 24 and 25 are transition verses. They're in reference both to the destruction of the temple and to the end of the world. So Jesus sees that first story of the destruction of the temple as foreshadowing the end of the world. And it's really not even about just what they're supposed to do on that day. But rather, It's the way that they're supposed to live, an attitude that he wants his disciples to have all the time. In fact, he'll say at the very end of the chapter, at the very end of the chapter, that what he says, it's not just for them, but it's for everyone, for every disciple. In verses 24 through 27, he talks explicitly about the end of the world, judgment, but doesn't give them at that time anything to do. It will come quick, it will be brief, and it will be done. In verses 28 until the end, Jesus gives us a series of warnings. The day of judgment is something that we should think about frequently, but not because Jesus is threatening us. And he says it's like a master who goes off on a journey and then will come back. And when he comes back, he expects to find his servants working, hard at work. If they don't, they will be punished. But that's not what he wants. He's not trying to find something wrong. In fact, before the master goes off on the journey, he tells the workers exactly what they should be doing. And so it is with our Lord. Yes, he comes as our judge, but he's also the one who prepares us for judgment. He gives us the answers to the test before he gives us the test. The only way those servants get in trouble is if they just don't do what their master asks. Likewise for us. The only way we fail on that day of judgment is if we choose to ignore the teachings that he gives us now. What is it that Jesus wants? Well, he wants us to not so much get wrapped up in things that are temporary, like material things, like accomplishments, like pride and honors, but rather, he wants us to bear fruit that will remain. Just this past week, I had a conversation with a woman in our parish who's been through some tremendous things this past year, things that the Lord has done through our parish community that have really helped her to grow in her faith. She said she's so much of a better Catholic now than she was before. And that's going to make a difference, she said, for her children, and one day even for their children. That's fruit that will remain. That's what our Lord wants for each one of us.